storms with climate change. The truth is that even if we always had hurricanes and storms, we have now hurricanes and storms with a much higher frequency and with a much higher intensity. And there is a clear link between the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, namely CO2, but not only CO2, the temperature of the water, and the intensity of the rainstorms and of the different hurricanes in this region and in other parts of the world. This link is obvious. When we have warmer temperatures in the water, there is more evaporation, there is more vapor in the atmosphere, and this obviously creates heavier rains, which means that when a hurricane goes through the ocean, instead of dissipating, is fueled by this presence of vapor in the atmosphere, and sometimes increases its dramatic impacts in the areas that will be affected after it reaches land. Hurricane Irma had winds of 300 kilometers per hour for 37 hours. This is the longest such period ever recorded. In the last 30 years, we had tripled the number of natural disasters and quintupled the economic losses due to these natural disasters. So the link between climate change and the devastations we are witnessing is clear, and there is a collective responsibility of the international community to stop this suicidal development. And for that, it's essential that the Paris Agreement on climate change is fully endorsed and respected, but also to recognize that the commitments made in Paris are not enough. So we need an enhanced engagement of the international community in order to be able to dominate climate change and to avoid this dramatic multiplication of disasters we are seeing, even more dramatic in the future. On the other hand, I want to make a very strong appeal for the international solidarity to the Caribbean islands impacted by these storms to translate themselves not only in immediate humanitarian aid, and it is coming, but not enough, but also in new mechanisms allowing for effective reconstruction and to build up resilience in relation to future storms. As it was said by the Prime Minister, most of the countries impacted are middle-income countries, and because of that they are deprived of the forms of assistance or concessional loans that low-income countries can have access to. Or the fact is that even if these countries have graduated as middle-income countries, they have a number of vulnerabilities that need to be taken into account if we want them to be sustainable as middle-income countries. And so when these countries are facing external shocks of the magnitude of the ones that we are witnessing, it is absolutely crucial that they benefit from innovative forms of funding and from assistance, concessional loans, new bonds, and one of the ideas that our Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean has expressed is the possibility to transform the repayments of debt in investments made by the countries to build resilience in relation to storms. So there is a number of instruments that can be put in place. The World Bank will be launching soon a donors conference, and I would recall that the World Bank had the initiative several years ago to consider that countries like Jordan and Lebanon, because of the inflow of refugees, even if they were middle-income countries, should have access to concessional financing because of the internal shock that those refugees have represented. I think we are now facing a similar situation, and my appeal to the international community is to have an engagement in developing innovative mechanisms of financing, allowing the Caribbean states to be able to not only face the enormous challenges they are facing, but to fully commit themselves to the Sustainable Development Goals and to the well-being of their populations. I want to express my very deep gratitude for the people of Antigua and Barbuda and for the government for their warm welcome, and once again to reaffirm my total commitment to do everything possible to make sure that the international community fully assumes its responsibilities in support to the highlands impacted by such dramatic events.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please identify your media house and pose your question. First, we have Ms. Martina.
Martina Johnson, Antigua Observer. Mr. Guterres, 23 years after the UN Global Conference made the case for the unique and special vulnerability of small island development states, the UN has failed to change this prevailing view of the international donor community that the gross national income per capita of middle-income Caribbean islands is too high for them to access funding. How can you, as a practical measure and as UN General Secretary, change this view that it will positively impact our small islands?
As I mentioned, we need to make sure that when a country graduates and becomes a middle-income country, that doesn't translate itself into a condition for the country not to be sustainable as a middle-income country. And there are indeed countries that have vulnerabilities in relation to external shocks that would strongly recommend that this graduation would not lead automatically to the loss of the forms of support that previously existed. And that is why I was saying that clearly, as I advocated in the past for Jordan and Lebanon in relation to the refugee inflow, clearly the countries of the Caribbean, with the vulnerabilities that have been described, in my opinion, justify forms of innovative financing, allowing to take into account not only the impact of these storms, the high level of debt, and all the other forms of vulnerability that its dimension naturally creates. And I hope that the international community will be able to take that into account in the near future. And I'm very confident that as it was possible to find solutions for Lebanon and Jordan, and I know the commitment of the President of the World Bank, I hope that in the next meeting of the boards of the World Bank and the IMF, this question will be seriously discussed.
Anita Kentish, Associated Press and Caribbean Media Corporation. Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Secretary General, I wanted to find out from both of you, given the fact that yes, we acknowledge the widespread devastation in Barbuda, but we also acknowledge that our sisters in Dominica, St. Martin, Anguilla, and so on have also experienced widespread destruction. We also see the United States not just experiencing in the past, but they are on the verge of experiencing another storm. With that in mind, how can agencies like the United Nations keep the small island states in the forefront, that they get the attention that they deserve and therefore the help we deserve?
My answer is very simple. Coming here, raising awareness and assuming a very strong engagement in solidarity with countries that are facing this very dramatic situation.
Hear, hear.
Secretary General Nicola Barrington from ABS Television. You mentioned that you have not seen such high levels of devastation as you've seen on Barbuda. You're going to see Dominica tomorrow. What is your response? Are you satisfied with the level of response from the international community, re humanitarian and financial aid?
No, I'm not satisfied. If I was satisfied, I probably would not need to come, because I'm not satisfied. But I know that there is a commitment, there is an interest, there is a growing recognition of the need to act, and I'm very hopeful that, namely in the donor conference that the World Bank is organizing, there will be a massive response from the international community.
We'll have one final question, please. After Martina.
What is the
Well,
point of the...
Martina, let us have someone else since you had a question already. Yes, please.
Hi, Jacqueline Charles, Miami Herald. Secretary General, can you talk a little bit about what you saw today and what was going through your mind as you toured Barbuda?
Sorry?
Can you talk a little bit about what you saw today as you toured Barbuda, what was going through your mind? Because you said you hadn't seen that level of devastation.
Well, it's how a storm of this magnitude can transform a paradise into hell. That's what I felt. I mean, Barbuda, I can imagine, I was not there before, but it's a paradise. I mean, those pristine waters, the level of privacy that is possible for people going there for holidays, the beauty of the landscape, the unique character of the island, and all of a sudden I didn't see one single house standing. I mean, everything was destroyed. And I know that during these months a lot has been done to clean the areas, the public areas, a lot has been done. I know that if I were to come 2 or 3 days after the storm, even we haven't seen any green. Everything was grey or brown. So really, to see a paradise transformed in hell is something that creates to us all that live in this planet a responsibility. We need to preserve our paradises. We need to make climate action our top priority.
One final from Francois.
From French TV, you've seen displaced people from Barbuda. Do you have the impression that what happened here in Barbuda could be an example of what could happen in the next years in other islands, but other parts of the world?
We are having a lot of displacement that is accelerated by climate change. Again, we always had displacement, we always had storms. But for instance, in the Sahel, we had drought every 10 years, then we had drought every 5 years, now we have drought every 2 years, and we see more and more people having to flee the Sahel and trying to cross to Europe through those horrible and tragic circumstances that we all know, and many of them dying. We see the people that had to be evacuated from Barbuda, and we see other storms forcing people to move in other parts of the world. The climate change is becoming one of the central reasons, one of the central causes of forced displacement in the world, and I think it is one more reason to do everything possible to stop this movement and to make climate action a strong priority of the whole of the international community.
And Prime Minister will now
And
wrap
just
up.
to succinctly state that we have, for the first time in our history, have to deal with internally displaced persons. Barbudans who are now displaced to some extent here in Antigua, even though we are a unitary state. But we also have seen a new phenomenon in climate refugees from other islands, including Dominica. And again, we don't necessarily want to refer them to as refugees in the sense that we're all part of a common space, but individuals who have had to leave neighboring islands to come here, to relocate here, because in many instances they would have lost everything. They would have lost their homes, their possessions, which means that the impact on Antigua is even greater than caring for the Barbudan people. We are also providing refuge for other neighboring islands. And it is something that we do willingly, but I just want everyone to understand the nature of the challenge, that the challenge goes beyond Barbuda, but also providing assistance to our neighboring islands. And let me just thank you all for coming. I want to thank the Secretary General again. I thank you very much for your commitment. I'm pretty sure that this trip to the Caribbean will be well remembered for a very long time, and we consider you to be a true friend of the Caribbean. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much. Storms with climate change. The truth is that even if we always had hurricanes and storms, we have now hurricanes and storms with a much higher frequency and with a much higher intensity. And there is a clear link between the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, in the water. There is more evaporation, there is more vapor in the atmosphere, and this obviously creates heavier rains, which means that when a hurricane goes through the ocean, instead of dissipating, is fueled by this presence of vapor sphere, namely CO2, but not only CO2, the temperature of the water, and the intensity of the rainstorms and of the different hurricanes in this region and in other parts of the world. This link is obvious. when we have warmer temperatures in the atmosphere and sometimes increases its dramatic impacts in the areas that will be affected after it reaches land. Hurricane Irma had winds of 300 kilometers per hour for 37 hours. This is the longest such period ever recorded. In the last 30 years, we had tripled the number of natural disasters and quintupled the economic losses due to these natural disasters. So the link between climate change and the devastations we are witnessing is clear, and there is